Hey, tonight we're going to journey back to a time when life was harder than you can imagine, but also filled with determination and hope. We're heading to colonial America where every single day was about survival, and where the smallest comforts felt like miracles. You'll experience what it was really like to wake up in a world without running water, electricity, or even glass windows. Hey, if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate it. Like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from, so drop a comment with your location and what time it is there now. Find a cozy spot, take a slow, deep breath, and let your body sink into comfort as we journey back in time together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in colonial America sometime in the early 1700s. The first thing that hits you isn't what you see, it's what you smell. There's wood smoke drifting through the air mixed with something earthier. Maybe it's the animals nearby, or perhaps it's just the general smell of a world where people rarely wash. Your nose wrinkles slightly, but you're already getting used to it. That's how the human body works. You know, it adapts faster than you'd think. The good news is you're alive and relatively healthy in an era where both of those things are pretty remarkable achievements. The bad news, well, you're about to discover that almost everything you take for granted in modern life simply doesn't exist yet. But here's the thing that might surprise you. The people around you aren't miserable. They're just living the only life they know, and they've figured out ways to find joy even when things are tough. You're lying on what passes for a bed in this era. It's not like the mattresses you know. This is basically a wooden frame with ropes strung across it, topped with a thin mattress stuffed with straw or corn husks. The ropes have stretched overnight, leaving you with a sag dip in the middle. You can feel every single piece of straw poking through the rough cloth. Your back aches in places you didn't know backs could ache. That's just how sleeping works here. Everyone wakes up a little sore. The room around you is dim lit only by whatever sunlight manages to squeeze through the small windows. There's no glass in these windows. Glass costs more than most people make in a year. Instead, there are wooden shutters that you can close to keep out rain and cold, but that also keeps out light. Some families stretch oiled paper or cloth across their windows, which lets in a little light but makes everything look cloudy and strange. You can hear your stomach rumbling. That's actually a good sign. It means you're not one of the many colonists who go to bed hungry. But it also means it's time to start the day, because getting food on the table in colonial America is an all-day job that starts before sunrise. The house is starting to stir around you. You can hear the soft thud of bare feet on wooden floors, the creak of floorboards that have been settling for decades. Someone's already up and moving. Probably the woman of the house, because her day starts earliest of all. She needs to get the fire going again because it died down overnight, and without it there's no way to cook food or heat water or stay warm. You swing your legs out of bed, and your feet hit the floor with a shock. The floor is just packed dirt, hard as stone and cold as winter. Some wealthier families have wooden floors, but most people live with floors made of earth that's been pounded down until it's smooth and solid. It's actually surprisingly practical, easy to sweep, and it doesn't cost anything to install, but it's always cold, and when it rains hard, sometimes water seeps up through the ground. The cold hits your body like a slap. There's no central heating here, obviously, and the fire that kept the house slightly warm yesterday evening has died down to glowing coals. You can see your breath in the air. Everyone's breath makes little puffs of steam in the morning, even in summer. In winter, people sometimes wake up to find frost on the insides of their windows and ice in their water buckets. You're wearing the same clothes you wore yesterday and the day before and the day before that. This isn't because you're lazy or dirty. It's because most people in colonial America own exactly one set of everyday clothes, maybe two if they're lucky. There's one set for everyday work and one set for church on Sundays. The fabric is rough and scratchy against your skin. It's usually made of wool or rough linen, woven by hand and sewn by hand with thick, uneven stitches designed to hold up under years of hardware. Your clothes smell like wood smoke and sweat and general human living, but so does everyone else's, so nobody notices. That's one of those weird things about living in a time when everyone smells pretty much the same. Your nose just stops registering it as unusual. It's background noise, like the sound of cars in a modern city. Walking to the window, you push open the wooden shutters and peer outside. The sun is just starting to rise, painting everything in that soft golden light that makes even the hardest life look beautiful. For a moment, you can see other houses scattered around, most of them looking very much like the one you're in. Small, wooden, with steep roofs and tiny windows. Some are made with a technique called lee and daub, where thin wooden sticks are woven together like a basket and then covered with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung that hardens into surprisingly sturdy walls. The landscape looks different than you'd expect. There are stumps everywhere, big thick tree stumps that show where massive trees once stood. Clearing land for farming is backbreaking work that takes years, and colonists often just cut down trees and leave the stumps to rot rather than spending the enormous effort it takes to dig them out. The fields between the stumps are planted with corn, wheat, or other crops that will hopefully keep everyone fed through the winter. You can see smoke rising from chimneys all around the area. Everyone's starting their day the same way, getting the fire going, because fire is literally life in colonial America. Without fire, you can't cook food, heat water, stay warm, or have light when the sun goes down. Keeping a fire going safely is a skill that can mean the difference between life and death, especially in winter. The sound of chickens clucking and roosters crowing fills the air. Almost every family keeps chickens because eggs and the occasional chicken dinner are crucial sources of protein. You might also hear the lowing of a cow or the snorting of pigs. Animals aren't pets here, and they're walking food supplies, and they're often kept close to the house where they can be protected from wild animals and thieves. Your stomach rumbles again. Louder this time. Time to think about breakfast, though breakfast is a generous term for what you're about to eat. Most colonial families start the day with something called mush, basically a porridge made from cornmeal and water, maybe with a little milk if the cow is producing. If you're lucky, there might be a bit of molasses or honey to sweeten it, but sugar is incredibly expensive and most families rarely taste it. The woman of the house is already in the kitchen area, which isn't really a separate room but just one end of the main room where the big fireplace is. She's building up the fire, feeding small sticks and kindling to the coals that she kept alive overnight. This is skilled work. If the fire dies completely, she'll have to walk to a neighbor's house to get live coals to restart it, because matches won't be invented for another century or so. You can hear the scrape of metal on metal as she hangs an iron pot over the fire. Everything about cooking here is heavy and hot and dangerous. The pots are made of thick iron that weighs more than you'd believe. The fire throws off sparks, and unpredictable heat burns are incredibly common, and a serious burn can easily kill you because there are no antibiotics or modern medical care. Water for the mush has to be carried from somewhere else. Maybe a well, maybe a stream, maybe just a rain barrel where water is collected and stored. There are no taps, no pipes, no indoor plumbing of any kind. Every drop of water used in the house has to be carried in by hand, bucket by bucket. That makes you very conscious of how much water you use. Washing dishes means heating water over the fire and using as little as possible. The smell of the cornmeal porridge starts to fill the house as it cooks. It's not an unpleasant smell, earthy and warm, and filling your mouth starts to water because your body knows that this simple food is going to have to fuel you through a day of hard physical work. There's no such thing as sitting around in colonial America. Everyone, including children, works from sunrise to sunset just to keep the family alive and fed. While the food cooks, you might hear the sound of someone else in the family starting their morning chores. Maybe it's the crack of wood being split for the fire or the squeak of a door as someone goes out to check on the animals. Even young children have jobs: feeding chickens, gathering eggs, carrying water, or sweeping floors. There's always work to be done, and everyone's labor is necessary for survival. The house around you is small and simple, but it represents an enormous amount of work. Every piece of wood was cut by hand and shaped by hand. Every nail was made by a blacksmith, one at a time. The windows, if there are any real windows with glass, cost more than most people earn in months. Nothing here was mass produced or came from a store. Almost everything was made by the family or traded for with neighbors. You're starting to understand something that modern people often forget: how much work it took just to survive in earlier times. Staying fed, staying warm, staying dry, staying healthy. These weren't things you could take for granted. They were daily challenges that required constant attention and hard work. But here's something beautiful about it: the people around you know how to do things that most modern people have never learned. They can build a house, grow food, preserve meat, make clothes, cure illnesses with herbs, and create useful tools from raw materials. They're incredibly skilled and self-sufficient in ways that might surprise you. The porridge is ready now. The woman of the house ladles it into wooden bowls. There are no plates as you know them. Most families eat from wooden trenches, which are basically thick wooden boards with hollows carved out for food. Spoons exist, but forks are rare, and knives are mostly for cutting, not eating. Most people eat with their hands or use pieces of bread to scoop up food. The mush is hot and filling, though not particularly flavorful. There's no salt unless the family can afford to buy it, and most seasonings are whatever herbs can be grown locally. But when you're hungry and facing a day of hard work, even plain food tastes good. Your body craves the calories and carbohydrates that will give you energy for the physical labor ahead. As you eat, you start to think about the day ahead. If you're lucky enough to live on a farm, and most colonists do, your day will be spent doing whatever work the season demands. In spring, that might mean plowing fields or planting crops. In summer, it's weeding and tending the growing plants. In fall, it's harvesting and preserving food for winter. In winter, it's maintaining tools, spinning thread, making clothes, and trying to stay warm. The rhythm of life here follows the seasons and the sun. You go to bed when it gets dark because candles are expensive and firelight is dim. You wake up when the sun rises because there's no point lying in bed when there's work to be done. Your schedule is determined by the weather, the crops, and the animals, not by clocks or calendars outside. You can hear the sound of other families starting their days, children's voices as they do their morning chores, the thunk of an axe biting into wood, the squeak of a well rop as someone draws water, the sound of a cow being milked. These are the sounds of a community where everyone depends on everyone else for survival, and survival really is the key word here. You're living in a time when a bad harvest means hunger, when a harsh winter means death, when a simple injury can become infected and kill you. There are no hospitals, no grocery stores, no government programs to help. When things go wrong, families and communities have to take care of themselves and each other. But there's also something deeply satisfying about this life, even with all its hardships. When you grow your own food, build your own shelter, and make your own clothes, you have a connection to the basic necessities of life that most modern people never experience. You know exactly where your food comes from and how much work it took to produce it. You understand the value of simple things like a warm fire or a dry roof over your head. The porridge is finished now, and it's time to start the real work of the day. Your body feels heavy and warm with food ready for whatever physical challenges lie ahead. The fire is burning steady and bright, promising warmth and the ability to cook dinner later. The sun is rising higher, bringing light and the promise of another day survived in this challenging but ultimately rewarding world. You're about to step into a day that will test your strength, your skills, and your endurance, but you're also about to experience the deep satisfaction that comes from using your hands and your back to create something valuable, to contribute to your family's survival, and to be part of a community where everyone's work matters. As you step outside into the crisp morning air, the first thing you notice is how different this world smells compared to what you might expect. There's the clean scent of wood smoke, yes, but underneath that there's something earthier, more pungent. It's the smell of a world without modern sanitation, where humans and animals live much closer together than you're used to, and where the idea of taking a bath is almost unthinkable. The house you just left represents months of backbreaking labor. Every single piece of wood was cut by hand using saws that had to be sharpened constantly. The walls were built using a technique that would seem almost impossible today. First, the men of the community came together to raise a wooden frame, massive beams of oak or pine that were shaped with hand tools and joined together with wooden pegs and careful carpentry. You can see the marks where broad axes shaped each beam, leaving surfaces that are smooth but obviously handmade between those wooden beams. The walls are filled with something called lee and dorb. Picture this: thin wooden sticks, maybe as thick as your thumb, woven together like a giant basket. Then comes the dorb, a mixture that might make your stomach turn. It's mud, yes, but mixed with straw, animal hair, and often animal dung, cow manure, horse manure, whatever was available. The mixture is plastered over the woven sticks and left to dry into walls that are surprisingly strong and weatherproof. If you ran your hand along the inside wall of the house, you'd feel the rough texture where this mixture was smoothed by hand. Sometimes you can still see handprints in the dry dorb where someone pressed too hard while working. These aren't perfect smooth walls like you're used to. They're organic, uneven, shaped by human hands working with whatever materials the land provided. The roof above your head is probably made of thatch, layers and layers of dried straw or reeds. It's woven together so tightly that water runs off instead of soaking through. Building a thatched roof is an art form that takes years to learn. The thatcher starts at the bottom and works up, layering the straw so that each row overlaps the one below it. When it's done properly, a thatched roof can last for decades and keep a house completely dry even in the worst storms. But here's something that might surprise you about colonial houses: they're usually just 1 or 2 rooms total. That house you woke up in, it might be home to a family of 8 or 10 people, parents, children, grandparents, maybe a servant or two, all living in a space smaller than many modern bedrooms. Privacy, as you understand it, simply doesn't exist. Everyone sleeps in the same room, everyone shares the same space, and everyone knows everyone else's business. The lack of privacy extends to something that modern people find almost unimaginable: what happens when you need to use the bathroom. As you walk around the property, you notice a small wooden structure set back from the house, maybe 50 or 100 feet away. That's the privy or outhouse, and it's where every member of the family takes care of their most basic biological needs. The outhouse is basically a wooden shed built over a deep hole in the ground. Inside, there's a wooden seat with a hole cut in it, and underneath that hole is a pit that might be 6 or 8 feet deep. There's no toilet paper, that won't be invented for another century. Instead, there might be corn cobs, old rags, or just smooth stones for cleaning yourself in winter. Going to the outhouse means bundling up and trudging through snow and ice for what might be a very unpleasant few minutes. But here's the thing that really shows how different life was: when that pit gets full, someone has to dig a new one and move the outhouse. Imagine that job on a hot summer day. The waste doesn't just disappear, it sits there fermenting and attracting flies and creating smells that would make a modern person sick. And because most colonial settlements are built near water sources like streams or wells, that waste often seeps into the ground and contaminates the drinking water. This contamination is one of the biggest killers in colonial America. Diseases like dysentery, typhoid fever, and cholera spread like wildfire through communities where human waste and drinking water mix. You might remember reading about Valley Forge, where George Washington's army spent that terrible winter. What you might not know is that more of his soldiers died from disease than from cold or hunger. About 23 of the men who died at Valley Forge were killed by dysentery and typhoid fever, diseases that spread because of poor sanitation. When night falls or the weather is too harsh for a trip to the outhouse, families use chamber pots. These are basically ceramic or metal bowls that people use as toilets inside the house. Every morning, someone, usually a woman or child, has to empty these pots. And where do they empty them? Often they just dump them out the nearest window. If you were walking down a street in colonial Boston or Philadelphia, you'd want to stay alert for the cry of Gare de Lou, a warning that someone was about to Dump a chamber pot from an upstairs window. The streets themselves are something that would shock modern sensibilities. There's no garbage collection, no street cleaning, no sewage system. People throw their household waste directly into the street. Food scraps, broken pottery, old clothes, and yes, human waste all end up in the roadways. Add to that the droppings from all the horses, cows, pigs, and chickens that share the streets with people, and you get a picture of urban life that's hard to imagine. When it rains, these streets become rivers of filth. When it's dry, the waste turns to dust that blows around and gets into everything. The smell is something you'd have to experience to believe, and this isn't just in poor neighborhoods. Even the wealthiest parts of colonial cities deal with these same sanitation problems. Given all this, you might think that people in colonial times were constantly trying to get clean, but here's something that would absolutely amaze a modern person. Most colonists almost never take baths, not because they're lazy or don't care about being clean, but because the very idea of immersing your whole body in water is seen as dangerous, unhealthy, and possibly immoral. The typical colonial American might wash their face and hands once a day using a cloth and a basin of water. That's it. That's the extent of their daily hygiene routine. Their bodies from neck to toe might not be washed with soap and water for months at a time, maybe not even once a year. Full body bathing is reserved for infants, and even then it's more about hardening them against disease than about getting them clean. Why this fear of bathing? Part of it comes from medical beliefs of the time. Many doctors believe that water can weaken the body or make it more susceptible to disease. They think that the natural oils and dirt on your skin actually protect you from illness. The idea that cleanliness prevents disease, something we take for granted, simply hasn't been discovered yet. Religion plays a role too. Some religious leaders preach that too much attention to the body is vanity, and that suffering through discomfort is good for the soul. The Puritans, who have a huge influence on colonial culture, believe that cleanliness is important for moral reasons, but they mean clean clothes and tidy homes, not clean bodies. There's also the practical matter of heating water. Remember, every drop of water has to be carried by hand and heated over a fire. Heating enough water to fill a bathtub would take hours and use enormous amounts of precious firewood. For most families, it's just not worth the expense and effort. So what do people smell like? Well, everyone smells pretty much the same, like wood, smoke, sweat, and the general scent of human bodies that haven't been washed. Clothes are rarely laundered because soap is expensive and the process of washing clothes is incredibly labor-intensive. Most people own only 1 or 2 sets of clothes, and they wear them until they literally fall apart. The soap that does exist is nothing like what you're familiar with. Colonial soap is made from animal fat and lye, which is created by filtering water through wood ashes. The process is dangerous. Lye can burn your skin, and the resulting soap is harsh and caustic. It's primarily used for washing dishes and clothes, not bodies. Using this soap on your skin would leave you red, irritated, and probably with chemical burns. Women's hair is kept covered almost all the time, partly for religious reasons and partly because washing hair is almost impossible. They might brush it and rebraid it, but actually washing it with soap and water is a rare event. Men often keep their hair short or shave their heads completely and wear wigs instead. The wigs can be cleaned more easily than natural hair, and they can be removed if they become too infested with lice, and lice are everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Body lice, head lice, clothes lice, they're just part of life. Everyone has them, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest merchant. George Washington himself complained about wigs full of lice. People try to control them by combing their hair with fine-toothed combs and by boiling their clothes, but completely getting rid of lice is nearly impossible in a world without effective cleaning methods. The smell of unwashed human bodies is just background noise in colonial life. When everyone smells the same, your nose stops noticing it. It's like how people who live near a paper mill stop smelling the sulfur, or how people in modern cities stop hearing traffic noise. Your senses adapt to what's normal in your environment, but the consequences of all this poor sanitation go far beyond just smells and discomfort. Disease spreads rapidly through communities where people live close together without proper hygiene. Smallpox, measles, influenza, and other contagious diseases can wipe out entire families or even whole settlements. Medical knowledge is primitive and there are no antibiotics or vaccines. When someone gets sick, their family can only hope and pray and try whatever folk remedies they know. Even minor infections can become life-threatening. A small cut that gets dirty can lead to blood poisoning. A tooth infection can spread to the brain. Childbirth is incredibly dangerous because there's no understanding of germs or sterile conditions. Many women die in childbirth, and those who survive often suffer from infections that plague them for the rest of their lives. The irony is that people in colonial times often live closer to nature and get more physical exercise than modern people, which should make them healthier, and in some ways they're usually stronger and more physically capable than people today, but the lack of basic sanitation and medical knowledge means they die young from diseases that would be easily treatable now. Children are especially vulnerable. It's not uncommon for families to lose half their children before they reach adulthood. Parents don't even name babies until they're several months old because infant mortality is so high. When you see colonial graveyards, you'll notice how many tiny headstones there are marking the graves of children. who lived only days or weeks. Despite all these challenges, colonial families developed strategies for dealing with the realities of their time. They burned certain herbs to mask odor and hopefully repel insects. They changed their clothes more often than they wash their bodies. They keep their living spaces as clean as possible, even if their bodies aren't clean by modern standards. And there's something to be said for the resilience this lifestyle builds. People in colonial times have incredibly strong immune systems because they're constantly exposed to germs and bacteria. Those who survive childhood are often remarkably hardy and able to withstand conditions that would make modern people seriously ill. The community aspect of colonial life also helps people cope with the hardships. When everyone faces the same challenges, there's a sense of shared struggle that brings people together. Neighbors help each other with difficult tasks, share resources during hard times, and provide emotional support when tragedy strikes. As you stand outside that colonial house, breathing in the morning air with all its complex smells, you're experiencing a world that's both harsher and more intimate than anything most modern people can imagine. It's a world where survival depends on community, where physical strength and practical skills matter more than book learning, and where the simple act of staying alive through another day is an achievement worth celebrating. The sun is climbing higher now, and the day's work is calling. Time to discover what it really means to earn your living with your hands, and you're back in a world where there are no shortcuts, no machines to do the work for you, and no safety net if you fail. The workday in colonial America begins the moment you can see your hand in front of your face, and it doesn't end until the last light fades from the sky. You're about to discover that staying alive in this era requires a level of physical effort that would exhaust most modern people within hours. Every single thing you eat, every piece of clothing you wear, every tool you use has to be created by hand from raw materials using techniques passed down through generations. Your empty stomach reminds you that the morning's cornmeal mush was just the beginning of a day centered around food, growing it, preparing it, preserving it, and constantly worrying about whether there will be enough to last through the winter. The difference between a good harvest and a bad harvest is literally the difference between life and death, and that knowledge shapes every decision a colonial family makes. If you're living on a farm, and remember, most colonists do, your day revolves around the endless cycle of agricultural work. Right now in early morning, you can hear the sounds of animals that need tending. The cow needs milking, and that's usually a woman's job, though older children might help. Milking isn't the simple, peaceful process you might imagine from pictures. Cows in colonial times are smaller than modern dairy cows, but they're also more temperamental, and they give much less milk. The woman doing the milking sits on a low wooden stool beside the cow, holding a wooden bucket between her knees. Her hands work in a rhythm that she learned as a child: squeeze, pull, while the cow shifts and stamps and occasionally tries to kick. The milk comes out warm and frothy, and sometimes the cow decides she doesn't want to be milked and tries to step in the bucket or knock it over. Getting a gallon of milk might take an hour of patient, skilled work. That milk is precious beyond anything you can imagine. There's no refrigeration, so it has to be used quickly or turned into something that will keep longer. Some of it might be churned into butter, a process that involves putting cream in a wooden churn and agitating it for what feels like hours until the fat separates into solid butter and liquid buttermilk. Your arms would ache from the constant motion of working the churn paddle. Some milk gets made into cheese, which involves heating it gently, adding something acidic like vinegar to make it curdle, then pressing the curds in cloth to squeeze out the liquid whey. The cheese can be aged in cool cellars to last through winter months. When the cow produces less milk or stops producing altogether, the eggs from the chickens need gathering too, and this is often a job for children. You'd carry a basket and search through the chicken coop, reaching carefully under hens that might peck your hand if they're feeling protective of their eggs. Chickens in colonial times aren't the plump, docile birds you see on modern farms. They're smaller, scrappier, more like wild birds, and they can be surprisingly aggressive when they want to be. But the real work of colonial life happens in the fields. If you're a man or boy, you'll spend most of your day doing agricultural work that would break the back of someone not used to it. Plowing a field means walking behind a wooden plow pulled by oxen or horses, holding the handles and keeping the blade at just the right angle to cut through the soil. The ground is rough and full of rocks and roots, so the plow jumps and jerks, constantly sending shocks up through your arms and shoulders. You don't have neat, flat fields like modern farms. Colonial fields are full of tree stumps because cutting down trees is one thing, but digging out the massive root systems is almost impossible with hand tools, so farmers plant around the stumps and hope they'll rot away eventually. The fields are also full of rocks that have to be picked up by hand and carried to the edges to build stone walls. This rock picking is endless. Every spring, frost pushes new rocks up from deep in the ground. Planting is done by hand, seed by seed. Corn kernels are dropped into holes made with a pointed stick, a few kernels per hole, spaced far enough apart that the plants won't compete with each other. Beans might be planted between the corn rows so they can climb the corn stalk. Squash grows along the ground between the rows, creating what Native Americans call the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash grown together in a system that helps all three plants thrive. The work is rhythmic and mindless in some ways, but also requires constant attention. Plant too shallow and birds will eat the seeds. Plant too deep and they won't sprout. Space them wrong and the plants will crowd each other out. Every movement has to be precise, and you're doing this for hours at a time. Bent over in the sun with sweat stinging your eyes and dirt grinding between your teeth. Weeding the crops is even more tedious. Armed with a hoe, a wooden handle with a metal blade, you chop out weeds that grow between the crop plants. This has to be done regularly all summer long because weeds grow faster than crops and will choke them out if given the chance. You develop a rhythm: chop step, working your way down endless rows while the sun beats down on your back. Harvest time is when everyone in the family works together. From dawn to dusk, corn has to be picked by hand, ear by ear, and then the kernels have to be removed from the cobs. This is often done as a community activity with several families gathering together for a corn husking bee. People sit in a circle talking and laughing while their hands work automatically stripping kernels from cobs and dropping them into baskets. Wheat and other grains are cut with hand tools called scythes, long wooden handles with curved metal blades. Using a scythe properly is an art that takes years to learn. You swing the blade in a smooth arc, cutting through the grain stalks close to the ground while walking forward at just the right pace. Do it wrong, and you'll either miss the grain or cut yourself with the razor-sharp blade. The cut grain has to be gathered into bundles called sheaves, then loaded onto carts and taken to a barn where it can be threshed, beaten with wooden tools called flails to separate the grain from the stalks. Then the grain has to be winnowed, which means tossing it in the air on a windy day so the lighter chaff blows away and the heavier grain falls into baskets. Food preservation is a constant concern because there's no way to keep things fresh for long. Meat gets smoked, salted, or dried into jerky. Vegetables are pickled in brine or vinegar. Fruits are dried or made into preserves with precious sugar or honey. Root vegetables like turnips and carrots can be stored in cool cellars buried in sand or straw to keep them from freezing or rotting. The smokehouse is a small building where meat is hung over smoldering fires for days or weeks. The smoke not only flavors the meat, but also preserves it by driving out moisture and creating chemicals that prevent spoilage. Tending a smokehouse fire requires skill. Too hot and the meat cooks instead of smoking. Too cool and it spoils before it's preserved. Making salt pork involves packing pieces of pork in barrels with layers of coarse salt. The salt draws out moisture and creates an environment where harmful bacteria can't grow. Salt beef, salt fish. These preserved foods can last for months and provide protein when fresh meat isn't available. While the men and boys work in the fields, women and girls have their own exhausting list of tasks that never end. Making clothes starts with growing flax for linen or raising sheep for wool. Flax has to be harvested, soaked in water until it rots slightly, then beaten and combed to separate the fibers. Sheep have to be sheared once a year, and their wool has to be cleaned, sorted, and prepared for spinning. Spinning thread is a skill that takes years to master. Using a spinning wheel, a woman draws out fibers and twists them into continuous thread, controlling the thickness and strength with subtle movements of her fingers. A skilled spinner can produce several hundred yards of thread in a day, but it requires hours of concentrated work. The spinning wheel makes a constant humming sound as the wheel turns, and women often sing or tell stories while they work to help pass the time. The thread then has to be woven into cloth on a loom, a wooden frame that holds parallel threads called the warp, while the weaver passes other threads called the weft back and forth through them. Operating a loom is like playing a musical instrument. Your hands and feet work together in complex patterns, and the rhythm becomes almost hypnotic after a while. But even after the cloth is woven, the work isn't done. Wool cloth has to be fulled, washed, and beaten to make the fibers lock together and create a denser, warmer fabric. Linen has to be bleached by laying it out in the sun and dampening it repeatedly over weeks or months. Then the cloth has to be cut and sewn into clothes using patterns passed down from mother to daughter. All sewing is done by hand, stitch by tiny stitch. A woman might spend weeks making a single shirt, and every stitch has to be strong enough to withstand years of hardware and harsh washing. The thread is made from the same fibers as the cloth, and needles are precious metal tools that are carefully maintained and never lost. Cooking is another full-time job that requires constant attention and skill. Every meal has to be prepared over an open fire in the fireplace using heavy iron pots that hang from hooks and chains. Controlling the heat means moving pots closer to or farther from the flames, adding or removing logs, and constantly tending the fire to keep it at the right temperature. Bread baking happens in a stone or brick oven built into the side of the fireplace. First, a fire is built inside the oven chamber and allowed to burn until the stones are heated through. Then the coals and ashes are scraped out. Loaves of bread are placed inside on wooden paddles, and the opening is sealed with a door or clay plug. The residual heat from the stones bakes the bread slowly, and evenly, but you can only bake when the oven is hot, so bread baking is a major production that happens once or twice a week. Women often coordinate with neighbors so that several families can use the same oven on the same day, taking turns sliding their loaves in and out of the hot chamber. Preparing other meals means constant stirring of stews and porridges to keep them from burning. Careful attention to roasting meat on spits that have to be turned by hand, and managing multiple pots and pans over a fire that throws off sparks and unpredictable heat. Burns are incredibly common, and a serious burn can easily become infected and kill you. Water for cooking and cleaning has to be carried from a well or stream bucket by bucket. In winter, this might mean breaking ice and melting it over the fire. In summer, it means walking to the water source multiple times a day with heavy buckets that leave your shoulders aching. Washing dishes is done with minimal water and harsh soap, and pots are often just scraped clean and wiped out rather than truly washed. The same pot might be used to cook several different foods in sequence, each one picking up flavors from what came before. Laundry is an occasional nightmare that involves heating large quantities of water, scrubbing clothes on washboards with harsh soap, rinsing them in cold water, and wringing them out by hand before hanging them to dry. Women often do laundry together as a community activity, share in the work, and the large vessels needed to heat water. The rhythm of colonial work follows the seasons and the daylight. In summer, when days are long, people work as much as 16 hours a day. In winter, when daylight is precious, they work by firelight, but mostly focus on indoor tasks like spinning, weaving, and tool repair. Everyone in the family has essential work to do. Children as young as 5 or 6 have regular chores that contribute to the family's survival. Boys help their fathers with farming and learn skills like carpentry, blacksmithing, or whatever trade the father practices. Girls help their mothers with cooking, cleaning, and textile work, learning the skills they'll need to run their own household someday. There's no such thing as leisure time as modern people understand it. When the essential work is done, people might have a few minutes to sit by the fire and talk, but there's always something that needs doing: clothes to mend, tools to repair, food to prepare for the next day. The physical toll of this lifestyle is enormous. People's hands are permanently stained and scarred from their work. Their backs ache from bending over crops and looms. Their feet are tough and calloused from walking on rough ground, but they're also incredibly strong and capable, able to do things with their hands that would seem like magic to someone from the modern world. By the time evening arrives and the last light fades from the sky, you've worked harder than most modern people work in a week. Your body is exhausted, your clothes are dirty and sweat-stained, and you smell like woods and honest labor, but you've also contributed something essential to your family's survival. And there's a deep satisfaction in that knowledge that helps ease the ache in your muscles as you finally rest after a day of backbreaking work. You might think all colonists lived the same hard life, but colonial America is actually a world divided into very distinct social classes, each with their own daily rhythms, their own challenges, and their own completely different relationship to comfort and survival. Where you fall in this social order determines everything from what you eat for breakfast to whether you'll live in a mansion or a one-room cabin. Let's say you're fortunate enough to be born into the upper class, the wealthy gentry, who own large plantations in the south or extensive land holdings in the north. Your morning begins very differently than the farmer's dawn we experienced earlier. Instead of rushing to milk cows and tend fires, you wake up in a bedroom that might actually have glass windows letting in soft filtered light that doesn't carry the bite of cold air. Your bed isn't a rope frame with straw, it's a proper wooden bedstead with a real mattress stuffed with feathers, or down. The sheets are made of fine linen, smooth against your skin instead of rough and scratchy. When you wake up, you don't immediately jump into yesterday's clothes. Instead, a servant, possibly an indentured servant or enslaved person, helps you dress in clothes made from imported fabrics cut by skilled tailor and sewn with tiny precise stitches. If you're a wealthy man, your daily outfit might include a linen shirt with delicate ruffles, a waistcoat made of silk or fine wool, breeches that fit properly instead of hanging loose, and stockings made of silk instead of rough wool. Your shoes have actual buckles made of silver or pewter, and they're designed for walking on wooden floors rather than trudging through muddy fields. Wealthy women wear stays. That's the colonial version of a corset made with strips of whalebone that shape their torso into the fashionable silhouette of the time. Over this goes a chemise of fine linen, then a petticoat, then the actual dress, which might be made of silk imported from China or fine wool from England. The colors are richer and brighter than anything a poor farmer could afford. Deep blues dyed with indigo, vibrant reds from costly cochineal, or elegant blacks that show they can afford to keep dark clothing clean. Both wealthy men and women often wear wigs made from human hair, carefully styled and powdered white. These wigs are expensive status symbols that require professional care. A good wig might cost as much as a poor family makes in a year, and maintaining it properly requires regular visits from a wig maker who cleans it, restyles it, and treats it for the lice that are still a constant problem even for the wealthy. The wealthy colonial's breakfast is a came before. Laundry is an occasional nightmare that involves heating large quantities of water, scrubbing clothes on washboards with harsh soap, rinsing them in cold water, and wringing them out by hand before hanging them to dry. Women often do laundry together as a community activity, share in the work, and the large vessels needed to heat water. The rhythm of colonial work follows the seasons and the daylight in summer when days are long. People work as much as 16 hours a day in winter when daylight is precious. They work by firelight, but mostly focus on indoor tasks like spinning, weaving, and tool repair. Everyone in the family has essential work to do. Children as young as 5 or 6 have regular chores that contribute to the family's survival. Boys help their fathers with farming and learn skills like carpentry, blacksmithing, or whatever trade the father practices. Girls help their mothers with cooking, cleaning, and textile work, learning the skills they'll need to run their own household. Someday there's no such thing as leisure time as modern people understand it. When the essential work is done, people might have a few minutes to sit by the fire and talk, but there's always something that needs doing: clothes to mend, tools to repair, food to prepare for the next day. The physical toll of this lifestyle is enormous. People's hands are permanently stained and scarred from their work. Their backs ache from bending over crops and looms. Their feet are tough and calloused from walking on rough ground, but they're also incredibly strong and capable, able to do things with their hands that would seem like magic to someone from the modern world. By the time evening arrives and the last light fades from the sky, you've worked harder than most modern people work in a week. Your body is exhausted, your clothes are dirty and sweat-stained, and you smell like woods and honest labor, but you've also contributed something essential to your family's survival. And there's a deep satisfaction in that knowledge that helps ease the ache in your muscles as you finally rest after a day of backbreaking work. You might think all colonists lived the same hard life, but colonial America is actually a world divided into very distinct social classes, each with their own daily rhythms, their own challenges, and their own completely different relationship to comfort and survival. Where you fall in this social order determines everything from what you eat for breakfast to whether you'll live in a mansion or a one-room cabin. Let's say you're fortunate enough to be born into the upper class, the wealthy gentry, who own large plantations in the south or extensive land holdings in the north. Your morning begins very differently than the farmer's dawn we experienced earlier. Instead of rushing to milk cows and tend fires, you wake up in a bedroom that might actually have glass windows letting in soft filtered light that doesn't carry the bite of cold air. Your bed isn't a rope frame with straw, it's a proper wooden bedstead with a real mattress stuffed with feathers or down. The sheets are made of fine linen, smooth against your skin instead of rough and scratchy. When you wake up, you don't immediately jump into yesterday's clothes. Instead, a servant, possibly an indentured servant or enslaved person, helps you dress in clothes made from imported fabrics cut by skilled tailor and sewn with tiny precise stitches. If you're a wealthy man, your daily outfit might include a linen shirt with delicate ruffles, a waistcoat made of silk or fine wool, breeches that fit properly instead of hanging loose, and stockings made of silk instead of rough wool. Your shoes have actual buckles made of silver or pewter, and they're designed for walking on wooden floors rather than trudging through muddy fields. Wealthy women wear stays. That's the colonial version of a corset made with strips of whalebone that shape their torso into the fashionable silhouette of the time. Over this goes a chemise of fine linen, then a petticoat, then the actual dress, which might be made of silk imported from China or fine wool from England. The colors are richer and brighter than anything a poor farmer could afford. Deep blues dyed with indigo, vibrant reds from costly cochineal, or elegant blacks that show they can afford to keep dark clothing clean. Both wealthy men and women often wear wigs made from human hair, carefully styled and powdered white. These wigs are expensive status symbols that require professional care. A good wig might cost as much as a poor family makes in a year, and maintaining it properly requires regular visits from a wig maker who cleans it, restyles it, and treats it for the lice that are still a constant problem even for the wealthy. The wealthy colonial's breakfast is a world away from cornmeal mush. There might be real tea imported from China served in delicate porcelain cups that cost more than most people's monthly income. Coffee is another luxury import served with actual sugar, white refined sugar that's been processed in the Caribbean and shipped north at enormous expense. The food includes fresh bread made from wheat flour instead of coarse cornmeal, butter churned from cream instead of the occasional scraping of fat, and maybe even fresh fruits or preserves made with that precious sugar. The wealthy don't do their own cooking. They have servants or enslaved people who tend the fires, prepare the meals, and serve the food on plates made of pewter or even imported china. The kitchen in a wealthy household might be a separate building to keep cooking smells and fire dangers away from the main house, connected by covered walkways where servants hurry back and forth carrying trays of food. These wealthy colonists live in houses that would amaze someone from the farming class. Multiple rooms, each with a specific purpose: a parlor for entertaining guests, a dining room just for eating, separate bedrooms for parents and children, and maybe even a library filled with books imported from Europe. The rooms have wooden floors instead of packed dirt, plastered walls instead of rough logs, and furniture made by skilled craftsmen rather than rough pieces knocked together from whatever wood was available. But here's something interesting about colonial society: wealth Doesn't necessarily mean comfort by modern standards. Even the richest colonist still lives without electricity, indoor plumbing, or central heating. They might have servants to tend their fires, but they still depend on fireplaces for heat and candles for light. They might eat off fine china, but they still eat with their hands or simple utensils. Their houses might be larger and better built, but they're still cold in winter and stuffy in summer. The middle class in colonial America, the middling sort, as they call themselves, includes merchants, skilled craftsmen, successful farmers, and professional people like doctors and lawyers. These people work with their hands, but their work requires skill and education, rather than just physical strength. A blacksmith, for example, needs to understand metals, fire, and complex tool-making techniques that take years to master. Walking into a blacksmith shop, you'd be hit immediately by the intense heat radiating from the forge, a special fireplace designed to burn charcoal at temperatures hot enough to make iron glow white hot. The air shimmers with heat waves and sweat would start pouring down your face within minutes. The blacksmith works in this environment all day, using heavy hammers to shape red-hot iron into horseshoes, nails, tools, and all the metal objects that colonial life requires. The rhythm of blacksmithing is hypnotic, the roar of the bellows forcing air into the fire, the ring of hammer on anvil, the hiss of hot metal being plunged into water to cool and harden it. A skilled blacksmith can judge the temperature of iron by its color and know exactly when it's ready to be shaped too hot and it crumbles too cool, and it won't bend. The timing has to be perfect. Carpenters and cabinet makers work with hand tools that require incredible skill to use properly. A master carpenter can shape a piece of wood with an adze, basically a sharp blade mounted perpendicular to a handle, creating smooth, curved surfaces that look almost machine-made. They can cut precise joints that fit together perfectly without any nails or screws, using only wooden pegs and the natural properties of the wood itself. These skilled craftsmen often live above or behind their workshops in houses that reflect their status as neither wealthy nor poor. The furniture is well made but not fancy, the food is adequate but not luxurious, and the clothes are sturdy and well fitted but made from practical fabrics rather than expensive imports. City life in colonial America offers opportunities that don't exist in rural areas, but it also brings challenges that farm families never face. In cities like Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, you might wake up to the sound of church bells marking the hours, the rumble of cartwheels on cobblestone streets, and the calls of street vendors hawking their wares. Cities have actual streets instead of just paths through the forest, though these streets are narrow, crowded, and often impossible. During bad weather, houses are built close together, sometimes sharing walls, and the smells and sounds of your neighbors are impossible to escape. In summer, the concentration of people and animals creates odor that are overwhelming even by colonial standards. But cities also offer conveniences that rural colonists can only dream of. There are actual shops where you can buy goods instead of having to make everything yourself. A baker sells fresh bread daily, so you don't need to grind your own grain and tend your own oven. A tailor can make clothes to order if you can afford it. An apothecary sells medicines and exotic spices imported from around the world. Taverns serve as the social centers of colonial cities. These aren't just places to drink, they're where businesses conducted, news is shared, and travelers find rooms for the night. Walking into a tavern, you'd be greeted by the smell of pipe tobacco, cooking food, and unwashed bodies mixed with the sound of conversation, laughter, and maybe a fiddle being played in the corner. The tavern keeper serves beer, ale, cider, and stronger drinks like rum and whiskey. Colonial Americans drink alcoholic beverages with every meal, including breakfast, because alcohol is often safer than water in cities where wells might be contaminated. Even children drink small beer, a weak alcoholic drink that's less likely to carry disease than plain water. Education in colonial America varies dramatically depending on your social class and where you live. Wealthy children, especially boys, might be sent to formal schools or have tutors who teach them Latin, Greek, mathematics, and classical literature. The goal is to prepare them for college, places like Harvard, which was founded in 1636, or the College of William and Mary in Virginia. Middle-class children might attend what are called dame schools, informal schools run by women in their homes, where children learn basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. The dame who runs the school is usually a widow or unmarried woman who needs income, and she teaches a dozen or so children of various ages in her kitchen or parlor. Poor children, especially in rural areas, often get no formal education at all. They might learn to read from their parents or the local minister, but more often they go straight to work as soon as they're old enough to be useful for them. Education means learning practical skills: how to farm, how to cook, how to make and repair the things their families need to survive. Even children who do learn to read often have very few books available. The Bible is usually the only book in most households, and children learn to read by studying Bible verses. Other books are incredibly expensive because they have to be imported from Europe or printed on hand-operated presses. Using paper that's made one sheet at a time, religious life dominates colonial society in ways that might surprise modern people. Sunday isn't just a day of rest, it's a day when everyone in the community is required to attend church services that can last for hours. The church building is often the largest and most impressive structure in town, and church attendance is both a religious duty and a social obligation. Puritan services in New England are particularly intense. The congregation sits on hard wooden benches in an unheated building, listening to sermons that can last 2 hours or more. The minister preaches about sin, salvation, and the constant struggle between good and evil, often using fear of damnation to encourage proper behavior. People are expected to sit perfectly still and pay attention, and falling asleep during the sermon is considered a serious breach of etiquette. But church isn't just about religion, it's also where the community comes together to share news, conduct business, and maintain social connections. After the service, people linger in the churchyard, catching up on gossip, arranging marriages, and discussing the practical matters of community life. Religious beliefs also shape daily behavior in ways that go far beyond Sunday services. The Puritans believed that hard work is a form of worship, that suffering builds character, and that success in this world might be a sign of God's favor. These beliefs help explain why colonists are willing to endure such difficult living conditions. They see hardship as part of God's plan. Colonial communities organize themselves around shared work and mutual aid in ways that are essential for survival. Barn raisings bring together all the men in an area to build a new barn in a single day. House raisings do the same for new homes. These events are part work party, part social gathering, with everyone contributing their labor and skills to help a neighbor. Quilting bees give women a chance to socialize while doing essential work. A group of women gather to work on a quilt together, their hands moving in practice patterns while they talk about their families, their communities, and their concerns. The quilts they create aren't just bed covers, they're works of art that represent countless hours of skilled labor and creativity. Corn husking. Bees turn the tedious work of preparing corn for storage into a social event. Families gather in someone's barn with huge piles of corners waiting to be husked. People sit in circles talking and laughing while their hands automatically strip away the husks. There might be music, dancing, and plenty of food to reward the workers. Harvest time brings communities together in ways that show how dependent people are on each other. When one family's crops are ready, neighbors drop their own work to help with the harvest. Everyone knows that they'll need the same help when their own crops are ready, and that a delay of even a few days can mean the difference between a successful harvest and disaster. The differences between the three colonial regions, New England, the Middle Colonies, and the South, create distinct cultural patterns that affect daily life in profound ways. New England, with its rocky soil and harsh winters, develops a culture based on small farms, fishing, and eventually manufacturing. The Middle Colonies, with their fertile soil and mild climate, become the breadbasket that feeds much of colonial America. The South, with its long growing season and rich soil, develops a plantation system based on cash crops like tobacco and rice. These regional differences show up in everything from the food people eat to the houses they build to the work they do. A New England fishing village looks and feels completely different from a Virginia tobacco plantation or a Pennsylvania grain farm. But despite these differences, all colonists share the basic challenge of creating a new society in a land that's still largely wilderness. The day is winding down now, and even in this stratified society where your birth largely determines your destiny, people from all social classes share certain experiences. They all depend on fire for heat and light. They all worry about disease and accidents that could end their lives without warning. They all live with the constant awareness that their survival depends on their own efforts and the support of their communities. As darkness falls and families gather around their fires, the social distinctions that matter so much during the day seem to fade a little. Rich or poor, city dweller or farmer, everyone faces the same basic human needs for warmth, food, shelter, and companionship. The flickering fire light creates a circle of warmth and safety that feels precious in a world full of danger and uncertainty. As winter settles over your colonial community, the harsh realities of life become even more apparent, but so do the remarkable ways that people adapt, survive, and even find joy in the midst of hardship. This is the season when the fragility of colonial life shows most clearly, when a simple illness can become a death sentence, when staying warm becomes a daily struggle, and when communities either pull together or fall apart under the pressure of survival. The approach of winter brings a different kind of work, the urgent task of preparing for months when the outside world becomes hostile and dangerous. You can feel the change in the air, that sharp bite that warns of frost coming soon. Every family knows that their survival through the coming months depends entirely on the preparations they make now. While there's still time, food preservation becomes desperate, urgent work. The last vegetables from the garden have to be harvested before the killing frost hits root. Vegetables like turnips, carrots, and potatoes are carefully dug up and stored in root cellars, underground chambers that stay cool enough to prevent spoilage but not cold enough to freeze. These cellars are carved out of hillsides or dug beneath houses lined with stones and covered with thick layers of earth. And straw for insulation. The apple harvest brings both celebration and backbreaking work. Apples are one of the few fruits that can be stored for months if kept cool and dry, so every apple matters. Some are eaten fresh. Some are dried in thin slices that can be stored in cloth bags, and many are pressed into cider. Cider isn't just a drink, it's a way of preserving the nutrition and calories from apples in liquid form that won't spoil as quickly as fresh fruit. Making cider involves crushing apples in wooden presses that require several strong people to operate. The juice that comes out is golden and sweet, but it doesn't stay that way for long. Without refrigeration, the natural yeasts on the apple skins quickly begin fermenting the juice into alcoholic cider. Within a few weeks, what started as sweet apple juice becomes mildly alcoholic, and after several months it can be quite potent. This fermentation isn't an accident, it's a preservation method. Alcoholic cider keeps much longer than fresh juice, and the alcohol helps kill harmful bacteria that might make people sick. Colonial families drink cider with every meal, including breakfast, and even children drink watered-down versions. It's often safer than water, especially in areas where wells might be contaminated. But despite all their preparations, colonial families live with the constant knowledge that winter might bring disaster in forms they can't control. Disease spreads more easily when people are crowded together in small, poorly ventilated houses. A single sick person can infect an entire family within days, and without effective medical treatment, minor illnesses often become fatal. The medical knowledge available to colonists is a strange mixture of folk wisdom, religious belief, and theories that we now know are completely wrong. When someone gets sick, their family might try remedies passed down through generations: herbal teas made from willow bark for pain, pick-uses made from bread and milk for infected wounds, or mixtures of honey and whiskey for coughs and sore throats. Some of these folk remedies actually work. Willow bark contains a compound similar to aspirin. Honey has natural antibacterial properties. Many herbs used in colonial medicine do have real medicinal effects, but the colonists don't understand why these treatments work, and they're just as likely to try remedies that are useless or even harmful. The few trained doctors available have medical theories that seem bizarre by modern standards. Many believe in the four humors, the idea that illness comes from imbalances between blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile in the body. Treatments often involve trying to rebalance these humors through bloodletting, purging, or other methods that usually make patients sicker rather than better. Bloodletting involves cutting a vein and letting blood flow out into a bowl, based on the theory that many illnesses are caused by having too much blood. Doctors use sharp instruments called lancets to make the cuts, and they might take pints of blood from patients who are already weakened by illness. This treatment sometimes kills people who might have recovered on their own. Purging involves giving patients powerful laxatives or substances that cause vomiting, again based on the theory that illness comes from having too much of something in the body that needs to be expelled. These treatments leave patients dehydrated and exhausted, often making their conditions much worse. When someone needs a tooth pulled, and toothaches are incredibly common because dental care barely exists, they usually have to visit a barber, blacksmith, or other tradesman who has the tools and the willingness to attempt tooth extraction. There's no anesthesia except possibly alcohol or opium. If the family can afford it, the patient sits in a chair while the dentist grips the tooth with metal pliers and tries to pull it out, often breaking it and leaving infected fragments in the jaw. George Washington himself suffered from terrible dental problems throughout his life. Contrary to popular belief, his false teeth weren't made of wood. They were constructed from a combination of metal, ivory, and both human and animal teeth. These dentures were painful to wear and distorted the shape of his face, but they were the best dental care available to even the wealthiest and most powerful man in America. For most colonists, dental care means living with pain until teeth fall out on their own or become so infected that they have to be removed. Many people lose most of their teeth by middle age, which affects not only their appearance but also their ability to eat properly and maintain adequate nutrition. The danger of infection from even minor injuries can't be overstated. A small cut that gets dirty can lead to blood poisoning that kills within days. Broken bones that puncture the skin almost always become infected. Childbirth, with its inevitable bleeding and tissue damage, is extremely dangerous for both mothers and babies. Women giving birth are attended by midwives, experienced women who have learned their skills through practice rather than formal training. These midwives know traditional techniques for dealing with difficult births, but they have no understanding of germs or sterile conditions. They might use the same tools and cloths for multiple births without cleaning them, unknowingly spreading infections that kill new mothers. Infant mortality is heartbreakingly high. Families often lose half their children before they reach adulthood. Parents don't even name babies until they're several months old because so many die within days or weeks of birth. When you walk through colonial cemeteries, you see row after row of tiny headstones marking the graves of children who lived only briefly. These constant threats to health and survival create a culture where people are deeply religious and fatalistic. They believe that life and death are in God's hands, and that suffering is part of his plan. This belief system helps them cope with tragedies that would devastate modern families: the death of children, the loss of spouses in their prime, the constant presence of pain and illness. But colonial life isn't all hardship and suffering. People find ways to create joy and celebration even in the midst of difficulty. Winter evenings, when the day's work is done early because of short daylight hours, become times for storytelling, music, and simple entertainment that brings families and communities together around the fireplace. Families gather to share stories passed down through generations. These might be folk tales brought from Europe, stories about local events and characters, or religious stories from the Bible. The storyteller's voice rises and falls with the flickering flames, creating dramatic shadows on the walls and drawing listeners into worlds of adventure and imagination. Music is a constant presence in colonial life. Though the instruments are simple and homemade, a fiddle made by a local craftsman provides music for dancing at community gatherings. Someone might play a wooden flute carved from a piece of maple, or beat out rhythms on a drum made from a hollow log with animal skin stretched across the top. Singing is free entertainment that everyone can participate in. Families sing together while they work, mother and daughters harmonizing while they spin thread, father and sons keeping time while they split with the songs. Might be hymns learned at church, work songs that help coordinate group labor, or ballads that tell stories of love, loss, and adventure. Children create their own entertainment from whatever materials are available. A piece of wood becomes a doll, a handful of stones becomes a game, a length of string becomes a toy called a whirligig that spins and buzzes when you pull it tight and release it. Boys might play with wooden hoops that they roll along the ground with sticks, or carve whistles from pieces of willow bark. Girls practice the skills they'll need as adults by playing with miniature versions of women's tools. They might have tiny spinning wheels, small looms, or doll-sized cooking pots that let them imitate their mother's work. These aren't just toys, they're training tools that teach essential life skills through play. Seasonal celebrations mark the rhythm of colonial life and provide breaks from the constant work of survival. Harvest festivals celebrate the successful completion of the year's agricultural work and give thanks for food that will carry the community through winter. These gatherings feature the best food the community can produce: fresh bread, roasted meat, preserved fruits, and that precious alcoholic cider. Christmas celebrations are quieter and more religious than modern holidays, focusing on church services and family gatherings rather than gift-giving. The Puritans actually disapprove of elaborate Christmas celebrations, viewing them as too close to Catholic traditions, but other colonial communities mark the season with special foods, decorations made from evergreen branches, and small gifts that family members make for each other. Spring brings celebrations of renewal and hope as communities emerge from the isolation and hardship of winter. The first green shoots appearing in gardens are cause for genuine joy after months of eating preserved and dried foods. The return of migratory birds, the blooming of fruit trees, and the warming of the soil all signal that the cycle of life is beginning again. But even as colonists adapt to the rhythms of their challenging life, larger forces are building that will eventually transform their world completely. The relationship between the American colonies and Great Britain is becoming increasingly strained over issues of taxation, representation, and control. The British government, deeply in debt from wars fought partly to defend the American colonies, begins imposing new taxes to raise revenue: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. These measures require colonists to pay taxes on everything from molasses to paper to tea, but the colonists have no representatives in the British Parliament, leading to the famous cry of no taxation without representation. Colonial merchants and craftsmen find their businesses hurt by British policies that favor trade with England over local production. A blacksmith who could make nails for his community is told he must buy more expensive nails shipped from England. A furniture maker who could craft beautiful pieces from local wood is undercut by imported goods. That British law favors these economic pressures, combined with a growing sense of American identity that's been developing for generations. Colonists who were born in America, whose parents and grandparents were born in America, begin to think of themselves as Americans rather than British subjects. They've built communities, cleared wilderness, and created a new society through their own labor and sacrifice. The Boston Tea Party of 1773 represents the culmination of years of growing resentment when British law gives the East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in America. Colonial merchants who have been importing and selling tea find their livelihoods threatened. The dramatic response, dumping hundreds of chests of expensive tea into Boston Harbor, shows how far the relationship between Britain and America has deteriorated. The punitive measures that Britain imposes in response: closing Boston Harbor, revoking Massachusetts charter allowing British officials accused of crimes to be tried in England. Rather than America convince many colonists that they can no longer count on fair treatment from the British government as tensions escalate toward armed conflict, the daily life of colonists begins to change in subtle but significant ways. Women organize boycott of British goods, refusing to buy imported tea cloth or other products. They revive the domestic production of items they had been importing, spinning more thread and weaving more cloth at home rather than buying finished goods from England. Men begin organizing militia units and practicing military drills on village greens. These aren't professional soldiers, they're farmers, craftsmen, and merchants who are learning to march in formation and fire muskets in coordinated volleys. They call themselves Minutemen because they pledge to be ready to fight at a minute's notice, the skills that colonists have developed through generations of hard-living, self-reliance, practical problem solving, the ability to endure hardship, and strong community bonds turn out to be exactly what they need to fight for independence. People who can build houses, grow food, make tools, and survive harsh winters without outside help are well prepared to create a new nation without British support. When the revolution finally comes, it brings new hardships, but also new hope. The Continental Army suffers terribly during that winter at Valley Forge, but the soldiers who survive are largely colonial farmers and craftsmen who already know how to endure cold, hunger, and discomfort. The women who support the war effort are already skilled at spinning thread, weaving cloth, and managing households without imported goods. As you drift off to sleep in your colonial bed with the fire dying down to glowing coals and the sounds of the community settling into nighttime quiet, you're experiencing the end of an era, the world you've lived in today, this world of handmade everything, of communities bound together by necessity, of lives shaped by the rhythms of seasons and the demands of survival, is about to be transformed by revolution and independence. But the character traits that this colonial experience has created won't disappear: the self-reliance, the willingness to work hard, the sense of community responsibility, the belief that ordinary people can solve extraordinary problems. These become part of the American character that continues to shape the nation for generations to come. The people sleeping around you tonight have already accomplished something remarkable. They've taken a wilderness and turned it into communities. They've transplanted European civilization to American soil and adapted it to new conditions. They've created a society where a poor farmer's son can become a skilled craftsman, where communities take care of their members, and where hard work and determination matter more than inherited status. In just a few years, these same people will create a new nation based on ideas that seem radical for their time, that governments should serve the people rather than the other way around, that ordinary citizens can govern themselves, that individual liberty and community responsibility can coexist. The daily experiences of colonial life, the need to cooperate for survival, the rewards of hard work, the dangers of concentrating too much power in distant authorities, have prepared them for this revolutionary experiment. So as you close your eyes and let the peaceful sounds of a colonial night wash over you, remember that you've spent a day in the lives of people who were quietly, unknowingly preparing to change the world. Their struggles with basic survival, their small daily acts of cooperation and mutual aid, their gradual development of a distinctly American way of life, all of this was building towards something larger than any of them could imagine. The morning will bring another day of hard work, another round of challenges and small triumphs, another opportunity to prove that free people can take care of themselves and each other, and eventually all those mornings will add up to something extraordinary, a new nation built on the foundation of everything these colonial Americans learned about life, work, community, and the quiet dignity of ordinary people doing extraordinary things.